Something unusual is unfolding in Washington, and it is not being driven by protest movements, opposition messaging, or election year theatrics. It is happening quietly, deliberately, and from within the same party that once prided itself on unity behind executive authority. For the first time in a long while, Republicans are not merely expressing discomfort with Donald Trump's methods. They are beginning to resist them. This is not a loud rebellion. There are no mass walkouts or fiery press conferences. Instead, there are closed-door meetings, carefully worded statements, procedural maneuvering, and a growing willingness among Republican lawmakers to say no to a president who has grown accustomed to unchecked compliance. And at the center of this shift is Trump's renewed reliance on emergency powers, a tool he increasingly treats not as an exception but as a governing strategy. Stay with this story, because what is happening now is not about one declaration, one vote, or one political fight. It is about whether the American system still has the capacity to restrain power when that power comes from within its own ranks. Picture the scene inside Washington as news of the latest emergency declaration spreads. Phones buzz late into the night. Staffers scramble to interpret legal language. Senators read the same headlines twice, not to confirm what Democrats are saying, but to understand what their own president has just done. Because this time, the outrage is not directed outward, it is internal. Donald Trump is not furious at the media. He is not attacking the opposition. He is confronting resistance from Republicans who have begun to question not just the wisdom of his actions, but the precedent they establish. And that distinction matters. When a president faces criticism from the other party, it is expected. When he faces limits imposed by his own, it signals something deeper. At the heart of this confrontation is Trump's use of emergency powers as a political instrument. Emergency declarations were designed for moments of genuine national crisis, circumstances where delay would endanger lives or security. But under Trump, emergencies have increasingly become rhetorical devices, a way to bypass debate, marginalize dissent, and concentrate authority in the executive branch. Republican lawmakers understand the danger of normalizing this approach. They understand that once emergencies become routine, the exception swallows the rule. And they understand that power claimed today does not disappear tomorrow. It becomes precedent. This is why figures like George Will have warned for years that the real threat to constitutional governance is not dramatic collapse, but gradual erosion. Not tanks in the streets, but norms quietly abandoned. Not coups, but compliance. And what we are witnessing now is a delayed reaction to that erosion as members of Trump's own party begin to recognize the cost of silence. The pushback did not emerge overnight. It has been building beneath the surface, driven by a growing realization that Trump's approach to authority is not situational, but philosophical. He does not view power as something constrained by institutions. He views it as something personal, something validated by loyalty and challenged only by betrayal. That worldview places him on a collision course with the Constitution itself. Because the American system is built on divided power, on friction, on the assumption that ambition must counter ambition. Emergency powers disrupt that balance by design, but only temporarily. When they are invoked repeatedly, they stop being safeguards and start becoming shortcuts. Republicans now find themselves in an uncomfortable position. Many supported Trump's earlier uses of emergency authority because they aligned with policy goals or political incentives. But each invocation made the next easier. Each precedent lowered the threshold. And now some lawmakers are asking whether they have helped create a presidency that no longer recognizes limits. This concern has manifested in procedural resistance. Lawmakers are revisiting statutory authorities, questioning timelines, and signaling that congressional oversight is not optional. These are not symbolic gestures. They are institutional ones, and Trump's reaction to them has been telling. Rather than negotiating, Trump has escalated. Rather than persuading, he has threatened. He has framed opposition not as disagreement, but as sabotage. This response reveals something fundamental about how he perceives power. For Trump, authority is affirmed by obedience. When obedience falters, he interprets it as an attack. George Will has long argued that this mindset is incompatible with constitutional governance. A president is not a sovereign. He is an office holder. His authority derives from law, not personal will. Emergency powers exist within that framework, not above it. And when a president begins to treat them as a substitute for consensus, the system begins to strain. That strain is now visible inside the Republican Party itself. Senators who once avoided confrontation are now calculating risk differently. They are weighing party loyalty against institutional responsibility. They are asking whether protecting the presidency means protecting the person who occupies it or protecting the limits that define it. This recalibration is subtle but profound. It is reflected in votes that would have been unthinkable a few years ago, in statements that emphasize process over personality, in a growing willingness to assert that no president, regardless of party, should wield emergency powers indefinitely without meaningful review. Trump understands this shift, which is why his rhetoric has grown sharper. He frames resistance as weakness. He warns of chaos if his authority is constrained. He presents himself as the sole barrier between stability and collapse. This narrative is familiar not just in American politics, but globally. Leaders who rely on emergency framing often do so because it discourages scrutiny. Emergencies compress time, they demand urgency, they discourage debate, and they centralize decision-making. For a president facing internal resistance, they are a powerful tool, but they come at a cost. Each declaration teaches the public to accept extraordinary measures as normal. Each one redefines the boundary between governance and command. Republicans are now confronting the implications of that cost. They recognize that emergency powers once expanded do not remain tied to a single leader or agenda. They become part of the institutional toolkit, and future presidents will inherit them, perhaps with very different priorities. This realization has prompted a quiet reassertion of congressional authority. Lawmakers are emphasizing oversight mechanisms, statutory limits, and reporting requirements. They are not trying to humiliate the president. They are trying to restrain the office. Trump, however, does not distinguish between the two. To him, institutional limits feel personal, and that perception has intensified the conflict. The more Republicans emphasize process, the more Trump emphasizes loyalty. The more they insist on rules, the more he frames himself as embattled. This dynamic has transformed what could have been a routine policy dispute into a test of constitutional resilience. It is no longer about whether a particular emergency declaration is justified. It is about whether the presidency still accepts that it is bounded. George Will has often warned that the greatest danger to Republican government is not corruption alone, but concentration. When power accumulates in one branch, one office, or one personality, accountability weakens. And accountability is not optional. It is the mechanism that converts authority into legitimacy. The Republican pushback we are seeing now is an attempt to restore that mechanism. It is not revolutionary. It is corrective. It reflects an understanding that institutions cannot function if they are permanently placed in a state of exception. This is why the story matters beyond Trump himself. Presidents come and go, precedents endure. If emergency powers become the default method of governance, then future leaders will inherit a presidency less constrained, less accountable, and more volatile. Republicans who are resisting now are not necessarily doing so out of ideological opposition to Trump. Many still support his policies. What has changed is their assessment of risk. They see that unchecked authority eventually turns inward, that loyalty tests multiply, that dissent becomes dangerous, and that institutions hollowed out for convenience rarely recover easily. Trump's insistence on emergency framing also reveals an underlying insecurity. Leaders confident in their authority do not need to suspend normal processes. They work within them. Emergencies are, by definition, temporary. When they become permanent, they cease to be emergencies at all. They become a governing philosophy. That philosophy is what alarms constitutional conservatives like George Will. It is not about left versus right. It is about the survival of a system designed to resist domination by any single will. When Republicans invoke that language now, they are not echoing Democratic talking points. They are defending their own institutional inheritance. This defense is happening slowly, unevenly, and under pressure. Trump continues to apply that pressure through public attacks and private threats. But pressure cuts both ways. Each escalation makes it harder for lawmakers to pretend that nothing fundamental is at stake. The public, meanwhile, sees only fragments of this struggle. Headlines about emergency declarations, sound bites about party divisions. What is less visible is the deeper recalibration underway inside Congress as lawmakers reconsider the balance of power they are willing to accept. This recalibration may not produce immediate drama. There may be no singular moment of rupture, but it will shape the boundaries of the presidency long after Trump leaves office. That is why this moment deserves attention. American democracy does not fail all at once. It weakens through habits, through shortcuts, through the gradual acceptance of extraordinary authority as routine, and it is preserved not by grand gestures, but by quiet insistence on limits. Republicans pushing back against Trump's emergency powers are engaging in that insistence. They are reminding the presidency that authority flows from law, not urgency. That power is strongest when restrained. And that loyalty to the Constitution sometimes requires saying no to a leader who demands yes. Whether this resistance holds remains uncertain. Trump is adept at bending institutions through pressure and spectacle. But the fact that resistance exists at all marks a significant shift. It suggests that the internal guardrails of the system are still capable of activating, even under strain. George Will has argued that the health of a republic is measured not by the ambitions of its leaders, but by the strength of its limits. The events unfolding now offer a test of that principle, a test not imposed from outside, but generated from within. And that is why this story matters, not because it features a dramatic declaration or a partisan clash, but because it asks a fundamental question. Can American institutions still restrain power when that power insists it cannot wait? The answer will not be delivered in a single vote or a single ruling. It will emerge gradually through choices made under pressure, through lawmakers who decide whether emergency is an exception or a habit, through a presidency that must decide whether it governs within limits or against them. History will not remember every declaration. It will remember whether the system endured. And right now, that endurance is being tested not by opposition, but by conscience within the ranks of power itself.